The humid Miami night air hung thick and still, tasting of salt from the nearby ocean and the distant scent of rain. Along a poorly lit, two-lane road flanked by the shadowy silhouettes of banyan trees, the rhythmic pulse of red and blue police lights cut through the darkness, casting long, dancing shadows on the asphalt. This was the approach to the exclusive Star Island, a world of manicured lawns and waterfront mansions, and tonight it was the site of a routine DUI checkpoint. The atmosphere was one of quiet, methodical procedure, the occasional murmur of voices and the crackle of a police radio being the only sounds to disturb the late-hour tranquility. Officer Frank Davis stood near the center of the operation, his face illuminated in brief, colorful flashes, a study in practiced calm amidst the silent tension that checkpoints always seemed to breed. His posture was relaxed but alert, a testament to 15 years spent navigating the unpredictable currents of the streets. A few minutes earlier, he had dealt with a teenager in a beat-up sedan, the boy's hands trembling as he handed over his license. Davis had been firm but kind, his voice low and steady, recognizing the fear in the young driver's eyes. He had sent him on his way with a simple warning about a broken taillight, a small act of discretion that wouldn't appear in any report. Now, as the sedan's red lights vanished down the road, Davis allowed himself a brief, weary sigh. He rubbed the back of his neck, the Kevlar vest feeling heavy and constricting. His thoughts drifted to his daughter, sleeping safely at home, and the college tuition bills that seemed to grow taller with each passing year, the silent motivation behind these long, thankless nights. The low rumble started as a distant vibration, growing rapidly into the aggressive, throaty roar of a high-performance engine. A Bentley Continental GT, its paint a glossy black that seemed to drink the very darkness around it, tore down the road and screeched to a halt just inches from the orange cone line. The car was a masterpiece of engineering and wealth, its polished hood reflecting the flashing police lights like a shattered mirror. Behind the wheel, the silhouette of a man was visible, his head shaking in clear, undisguised irritation. The sheer arrogance of the arrival sent a ripple of tension through the checkpoint. The other officers paused, their attention drawn to the spectacle. Davis straightened his back, his calm demeanor hardening into a mask of pure professionalism as he began the slow, deliberate walk toward the driver's side window. He knew this type of stop. It was never about the law, but about power. As Davis approached, the tinted window slid down just a few inches, revealing a sliver of the opulent interior and the face of Marcus Thorne. Thorne was a man in his 50s, with a tanned, leathery face, impeccably styled silver hair, and the kind of cold, dismissive eyes that had likely appraised and devalued countless people. He didn't wait for the officer to speak. His voice, sharp and laced with contempt, sliced through the night air. "I hope you know who I am," he sneered, the words a clear threat, not a question. On Davis's chest, a small, unobtrusive body camera was active, its tiny red light glowing steadily. It was a silent, impartial witness, recording the start of an encounter that would strip away the power of wealth and expose the raw, ugly face of entitlement for the entire world to see. This story shows how integrity stands tall against arrogance. If you believe in the power of quiet dignity, subscribe to our channel for more stories like this, and comment below telling us what city you're watching from. Officer Davis began with the calm, practiced cadence he had used thousands of times, his voice a neutral instrument of the law. "Good evening, sir. Officer Davis, Miami PD. This is a routine sobriety checkpoint. I'll just need to see your license and registration, please." He kept his expression unreadable, his stance non-threatening, a conscious effort to de-escalate any potential conflict before it began. He was simply a man doing his job, a fact that seemed to be utterly lost on the driver of the Bentley. The small gap in the window felt like a barricade, a deliberate barrier erected between two vastly different worlds, one of public service and the other of private, untouchable privilege. He waited patiently for the documents, the silence stretching on. Marcus Thorne let out a short, incredulous laugh, a sound completely devoid of humor. He didn't move a muscle to retrieve his documents. "License and registration?" he echoed, his voice dripping with condescension. Do you have any idea how much I contribute to this city's economy? My taxes pay your salary. They pay for that cheap vest you're wearing, that clunker of a police car, and this entire ridiculous, pointless charade on the side of the road. He gestured vaguely at the flashing lights, as if dismissing the entire operation as a personal inconvenience arranged solely to vex him. The entitlement was so profound, so baked into his being, that he saw the law not as a universal rule, but as a service he had purchased and could therefore ignore. As he spoke, Thorne gestured dismissively with his left hand, and under the soft glow of the Bentley's dashboard lights, a Patek Philippe Nautilus watch gleamed on his wrist. The intricate timepiece, worth more than the patrol car Davis drove, was a small but potent symbol of the chasm separating the two men. Thorne tapped the crystal face of the watch with a manicured fingernail, an impatient rhythm that underscored his words. My time is literally money, officer. We're not talking about a few dollars here and there. Every minute you keep me here costs more than you make in a week, and you are wasting it spectacularly. The insult was designed to feel casual, a simple statement of fact from his perspective, which somehow made it sting even more. Davis's expression didn't flicker. He had long ago learned to build a fortress around his pride during these encounters. Sir, everyone's time is valuable, he replied, his tone remaining steady and professional. This will be much quicker for both of us if you just cooperate with my request. He deliberately kept his gaze locked on Thorne's eyes, refusing to be distracted or intimidated by the trappings of wealth. He was asserting a different kind of authority, one that wasn't bought but earned, represented by the badge on his chest. It was an authority Thorne seemed fundamentally incapable of comprehending. Davis was a pillar of calm against which Thorne's arrogance was beginning to crash with increasing force. Thorne scoffed again and reached for his smartphone, a sleek, expensive device that he brandished like a weapon. Don't talk to me about cooperation, he spat. I'm about to place a call to Commissioner Matthews. David and I are personal friends. We play golf at the Indian Creek Country Club on Saturdays. I wonder what he'll think when I tell him one of his officers is harassing law-abiding citizens on their way home. We'll see how valuable your time is then, Officer Davis. The name-dropping was as clumsy as it was obvious, a brute force attempt to leverage influence and remind Davis of his place in the city's rigid hierarchy. He was making it clear that there were rules for ordinary people, and then there were the unwritten exceptions for men like him. Standing a few feet back, positioned just behind the Bentley's passenger door, was Davis's partner, Officer Miller. At 24, he was barely 6 months out of the academy, and his face was an open book of conflicting emotions. He watched the exchange with wide eyes, a mixture of second-hand indignation and profound admiration for his senior partner's unshakable composure. His hand rested on his service weapon, not because he sensed a physical threat, but as a nervous, unconscious habit. This was a lesson they didn't teach at the academy, how to absorb such potent, personal venom and not let it corrode your sense of duty. He was witnessing a masterclass in professional restraint, a quiet form of courage he hadn't known existed. It was then that Davis detected it. As Thorne leaned forward to emphasize a point, a distinct odor drifted through the small opening in the window. It was a complex scent, expensive, woody cologne mingled with the unmistakable sweet, peaty aroma of a high-end single malt scotch. Davis's nostrils flared almost imperceptibly. His training, honed over a decade and a half, took over instantly. The stop had just fundamentally changed. This was no longer just about a belligerent driver with an attitude problem. This was now a potential DUI, and the stakes had just been raised significantly for everyone involved. His focus sharpened, his senses heightening as he began to reassess the situation with this new, critical piece of information. His mind began to tick through a mental checklist, his outward calm belying the rapid calculations happening within. First, the aggressive driving on approach. Second, the bloodshot, watery eyes he could just make out in the dim interior lighting. Third, the slightly slurred quality of Thorne's speech, a subtle thickness to his words that he had tried to mask with arrogance. And now, the fourth and most damning piece of evidence, the undeniable smell of alcohol. Each point was a building block, constructing the unshakable foundation of probable cause. He knew with absolute certainty that he could not let this man drive away. The safety of the public, the core of his sworn oath, now depended on it. Thorne, however, remained blissfully unaware that he was methodically destroying his own defense. He continued his verbal assault, convinced that sheer force of personality would win the day. "This is nothing but harassment, a pathetic shakedown," he seethed. "You see the car, you see the watch, and you think you've hit the lottery. You think you can squeeze something out of me. Well, you've picked the wrong guy, pal. The absolute wrong guy." He was projecting his own transactional view of the world onto Davis, assuming the officer's motivations must be as corrupt and self-serving as his own. It was a miscalculation of character, so profound it would prove to be his undoing. Davis took a small, deliberate step closer to the window, his presence feeling larger, more official. "Sir, I can smell a significant amount of alcohol on your breath," he stated, his voice still level but now carrying an undeniable weight of authority. "For your safety and the safety of others on the road, I am going to need you to step out of the car so I can administer a standard field sobriety test." The words were polite, framed as a necessity of procedure, but there was no mistaking their meaning. This was no longer a request he was making. It was a lawful order, backed by the full power of the badge on his chest. The confrontation was about to escalate to a new, unavoidable level. Thorne's arrogant demeanor instantly shattered, replaced by a theatrical, almost comical display of panic. "Are you insane?" he shouted, his voice cracking with feigned desperation. "I told you, I'm in a hurry. My wife, she's at Mount Sinai Hospital. There was a terrible accident. I'm rushing to her side right now. My God, man, you're preventing me from getting to my critically injured wife." He clutched his chest, his eyes wide with a poorly acted anguish. He was gambling that a story of personal tragedy would be the one thing a police officer wouldn't dare to question, a sacred line that could not be crossed. It was a cynical, manipulative play, using the specter of human suffering as a shield for his own reckless behavior. The performance was impressive in its audacity. Thorne managed to inject a tremor into his voice and summon a look of profound distress. He was an actor on a stage of his own making, confident in his ability to command the scene. But Davis was a seasoned critic. Over 15 years, he had seen genuine grief, raw panic, and the heart-wrenching shock of real tragedy etched onto the faces of countless people. What he saw in Marcus Thorne's eyes was not pain, but calculation. The emotion felt hollow, rehearsed, and profoundly false. It was the performance of a man who was not used to being told no and was now throwing every weapon in his arsenal, no matter how despicable, at the problem. Davis's mind, a detailed map of Miami's streets, worked instantly. He had driven these roads his entire life. He calmly glanced past Thorne's impeccably styled silver hair down the long, dark road from which the Bentley had come. "Sir," he said, his voice remaining a placid sea against Thorne's storm of fake emotion, "Mount Sinai Medical Center is on 41st Street. That's north of here. You're traveling south, away from the hospital." The simple geographical fact was delivered without accusation, yet it landed with the devastating force of a final judgment. It was a clean surgical strike of logic that cut through the web of lies Thorne had so hastily spun. For a brief, unguarded moment, genuine panic flashed across Marcus Thorne's face. It wasn't concern for his fictional wife, but the raw, primal fear of being caught in a blatant lie. His carefully constructed facade crumbled. He quickly tried to patch it with anger, his go-to emotional response. "How dare you question me?" he roared, his voice now shrill. "I had to take a detour. There was traffic on the causeway. You're not a detective. You're a traffic cop. You're just trying to trap me, to twist my words." He was flailing, desperately trying to create a smokescreen of outrage to hide the simple, damning truth that he had been exposed. Davis offered no response. He simply stood his ground, his silence a more powerful indictment than any argument could ever be. The quiet of the night rushed back in to fill the space left by Thorne's shouting. The rhythmic flashing of the police lights continued their silent dance, and the ever-present bodycam recorded it all, the transparent lie, the furious and clumsy backtrack, the whole pathetic display of a powerful man unraveling under the weight of a simple truth. Thorne's wealth had bought him many things, but it couldn't buy him a new direction of travel or a more believable story. He had trapped himself in his own deceit. Watching from his vantage point, Officer Miller felt a new wave of understanding wash over him. This was no longer just about witnessing an entitled millionaire being a jerk. This was about watching a drunk driver, a man who could have killed someone just minutes earlier, now lying about a family tragedy to evade responsibility. The moral calculus of the situation became starkly clear. His quiet respect for his partner, Frank Davis, was solidifying into a deep and lasting admiration. He subtly shifted his position, angling his body to ensure his own cell phone, now discreetly recording, had a clear and unobstructed view of the entire interaction, creating a secondary corroborating record. Thorne, in his flustered state, made another critical error. He raised his phone to his ear again, desperate to sell his earlier lie. "I'm on the phone with my lawyer right now," he insisted, his voice taking on a high-pitched, almost pleading tone. "He is listening to every word of this illegal stop. He's recording you." He pressed the dark screen of the phone against his ear, hoping the gesture alone would be enough to intimidate the officers. It was a bluff born of desperation, a final, flimsy shield against the encroaching reality of his situation. He was no longer in control, and he was terrified. But technology, like geography, is an unforgiving arbiter of truth. The Bentley's deeply tinted window, designed to shield its occupant from the eyes of the world, now became his betrayer. In the intermittent flash of the blue and red lights, the polished glass acted as a perfect dark mirror. Reflected in its surface, clearly visible to Davis, was the screen of Thorne's expensive smartphone. It was completely black. No call in progress. No timer ticking away. No lit-up interface. Just a dark, dead screen. The lie was not just exposed. It was now visually, irrefutably confirmed. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. "Sir, the hospital is north. You're driving south," Davis stated, his voice now carrying a new edge of command. The thin veneer of politeness had been burned away by Thorne's lies, replaced by the hard steel of unwavering duty. "Your phone is not on a call. I have given you a lawful order. I am not going to ask you again. Step out of the vehicle now." The patience was still there, but it was no longer an invitation. It was the final courtesy before that lawful order was physically enforced. The time for talk was officially over. With a guttural roar of frustration, Thorne realized he was completely and utterly cornered. His arsenal of intimidation, his wealth, his status, his connections, his lies had failed him. Defeated, he shoved the heavy driver's side door open with such violent force that it swung wildly, nearly striking Davis, who had to take a quick, agile step back to avoid being hit. Thorne then stumbled out of the car, his expensive, custom-tailored suit looking rumpled and askew. His face, contorted with rage and humiliation, was a shocking sight under the harsh glare of the police lights. He was a king abruptly dethroned, and he was not handling it well. He stood unsteadily on the asphalt for a moment, the alcohol he had consumed clearly affecting his balance. He swayed slightly, blinking in the flashing lights as if they were a personal affront. He glared at Davis, his eyes burning with a hatred that was shockingly raw and personal. "You think you're a big man, don't you?" he slurred, pointing a trembling finger at Davis's badge. "With that cheap piece of tin and that gun on your hip, you're nothing. You're a glorified security guard, a blue-collar peasant with a power trip." The words were meant to wound, to find a chink in the armor of Davis's professionalism. The verbal floodgates opened, and a torrent of deeply personal, cruel insults poured out of Thorne. He was no longer trying to reason or intimidate, only to inflict pain. "Look at you," he spat, his eyes raking over Davis's uniform. "I bet you live in some disgusting little apartment in Hialeah. I bet your wife couldn't stand being married to a nobody, so she left you. I bet your kids are embarrassed to tell their friends what their loser father does for a living." He was throwing every stereotype, every cliché he could think of, hoping one would hit its mark and break the officer's composure. For the first time since the stop began, a flicker of raw emotion crossed Officer Davis's face. The generic insults about his job and his income were meaningless, but the mention of his children, specifically his daughter, landed like a sharp, unexpected blow. He saw a fleeting image of her face in his mind, the way she looked at him with such unvarnished pride when he came to her school in his dress uniform. He felt a hot flash of anger rise in his chest, a protective, fatherly rage. But then, just as quickly, he channeled it. He wouldn't give Thorne the satisfaction of a reaction. Instead, he converted the anger into a deeper, colder resolve. He would do this perfectly by the book. "Sir, for my safety, I need you to place your hands on the roof of the car," Davis instructed, his voice impressively steady, betraying none of the internal storm Thorne's words had just unleashed. This was a standard procedure, a pat-down for weapons before administering the sobriety test, but in this context, it felt like a significant power shift. It was a physical command, an assertion of control over Thorne's body, and it was a line Thorne was clearly not prepared to cross. Davis waited, his hand gesturing towards the glossy black roof of the Bentley. Thorne let out a bitter, ugly laugh that sounded more like a bark. "You touch me, and I'll own you," he threatened, his voice low and menacing. "I will bring the full weight of my legal team down on your pathetic life. They will sue you, the department, the city. They will comb through every minute of your existence looking for dirt. When they are done with you, you will be begging for change on a street corner, and you will remember this night." The threat was specific and vivid, designed to paralyze Davis with fear of retaliation. The standoff continued for what felt like an eternity. The seconds ticked by, each one thick with tension. Davis would issue a calm instruction explaining the necessity of the procedure. Thorne would counter with a new threat, a fresh insult, or a baseless accusation of police brutality. The air was thick and poisonous with his words. Officer Miller watched, his muscles tensed, ready to move in and assist if the situation turned physical. The entire world seemed to have shrunk to this small, charged patch of asphalt, a battleground where duty was pitted against an ego of monstrous proportions. The night held its breath, waiting for something to finally break. Suddenly, Thorne's demeanor shifted. A sly, cunning look entered his eyes. He seemed to relent. "Fine," he spat, the word dripping with venom. "You want my license so badly? You want to know who I am?" He reached dramatically into the back pocket of his tailored trousers and pulled out a thick, opulent wallet made from dark alligator skin. It was overflowing with the platinum edges of premium credit cards. He was not just retrieving his ID. He was making one last, desperate display of his financial superiority, a final reminder of the power he believed he still held. He held the wallet up between his thumb and forefinger, dangling it for a moment as if it were a royal scepter, the ultimate symbol of his identity and status. Then, in a final, calculated gesture of supreme and utter contempt, he didn't hand it to Officer Davis. With a flick of his wrist, he tossed it onto the damp, gritty asphalt. It landed directly between the two men, a final, insolent challenge. "You want it so badly?" Thorne sneered, his lips curling into a triumphant smirk. "Pick it up." Like a good little servant, the wallet lay on the ground with a soft, dull thud, falling open to reveal the crisp edges of $100 bills. A few drops of the cool, overnight dew began to settle on the expensive, textured leather. The act was so brazen, so profoundly demeaning, that it sucked all the air out of the night. This was the ultimate humiliation, a deliberate attempt to force a uniformed officer of the law to stoop, to bend the knee, to physically lower himself before the might of Marcus Thorne's wealth. It was a gesture designed to break not just a man's spirit, but the very authority his uniform represented. A heavy, profound silence descended upon the scene. Even the constant ambient chirp of the Florida crickets seemed to have ceased. Officer Miller instinctively took a step forward, his hand now firmly on his sidearm, convinced this was the breaking point, the one insult that could not be borne. He expected his partner to react with righteous anger, to physically subdue Thorne for such a flagrant act of disrespect. This was the moment where professionalism could, and perhaps should, snap under the unbearable strain. The tension was a palpable, living thing in the air between them. But Davis did not move. He simply stood there, his gaze dropping from Thorne's smug, triumphant face down to the discarded wallet on the ground. His jaw was clenched so tightly that a muscle jumped along his cheekbone. The small red light of the bodycam, still faithfully recording every detail, seemed to burn brighter in the darkness, a single point of objective truth in a storm of human ugliness. Davis then lifted his eyes and met Thorne's, holding his gaze for a long, silent moment. A silent elemental battle of wills was playing out under the relentless, flashing strobes of the police lights. Then Davis took a slow, deep, deliberate breath. He held it for a count of 3, then let it out just as slowly, the faint mist of it visible in the cool night air. It was more than a breath. It was a conscious act of control, a moment where he gathered all the outrage, all the fury, all the bone-deep weariness, and packed it away into a deep, inaccessible part of himself. He was not just a man anymore. He was a uniform, a symbol, and he would not allow that symbol to be tarnished by a moment of personal anger. He was remembering his training, his duty, and most of all, his daughter's admiring eyes. He did not break eye contact with Thorne as he gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. It was not a nod of submission or defeat. It was a nod of decision, of acceptance. He had chosen his path. He would walk through this final, calculated humiliation not as a victim submitting to his tormentor, but as a professional maintaining absolute control of the scene and himself. He would absorb this last poisoned arrow, and in doing so, he would win the war, even if it meant losing this single, degrading battle in the most public way possible. With a fluid grace that seemed impossible for a man wearing 30 pounds of gear, Davis bent at the knees and crouched down. The tough fabric of his uniform pants stretched taut over his thighs, and the leather of his duty belt gave a soft creak. The body camera's perspective dipped with him, its lens now aimed at the ground, capturing the sight of his black, gloved hand reaching for the wallet. The simple act of stooping felt momentous, a physical representation of the abuse he had been forced to endure for the last half hour. His gloved fingers closed around the expensive alligator skin. It felt foreign and slick beneath his touch. He could see the small, gold leaf lettering of Thorne's initials embossed near the seam. It was a symbol of a world of bespoke luxury, of effortless power and casual cruelty, a world he now knew with certainty he wanted no part of. He held the wallet for a second longer than necessary, the weight of it feeling both trivial and immense at the same time. He was holding the physical proof of Thorne's arrogance. He rose, not quickly, in a rush of anger or embarrassment, but with a deliberate, powerful slowness that commanded attention. He uncoiled to his full height, the wallet held loosely in his left hand. He was no longer stooping. He was standing tall, his shoulders back, his spine straight. And in that moment, the power dynamic, which Thorne had fought so hard to control, inexplicably and seismically shifted. By refusing to show his anger, by accepting the humiliation with quiet dignity, Davis had somehow seized a moral high ground that Thorne could never reach. The smug, triumphant look on Marcus Thorne's face began to waver. His smirk faltered. He had expected, had wanted a reaction. He had prepared for shouting, for a physical confrontation, for any loss of control that he could later use against the officer in a lawsuit. He had not expected this. He had not expected this unbreakable, silent dignity. Faced with a composure he could not shatter, he suddenly felt naked, his own behavior exposed as petty and childish. For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty appeared in his cold eyes. Davis's eyes were clear, steady, and held a depth that Thorne had not seen before. The ambient sounds of the checkpoint, the crackle of the radio, the hum of the cruiser's engine, seemed to fade into a low, distant hum. All attention, all energy, was focused on this single, charged moment between the two men. Davis looked Thorne directly in the eye, not as an officer to a suspect, but as one man to another, and in his gaze was the accumulated weight of 15 years of service. He spoke, and his voice was not loud, but it was imbued with a clarity and strength that cut through the humid night air like a surgeon's scalpel. Each word was carefully chosen, delivered with a calm deliberation that made it resonate with the force of an unshakable truth. "Sir, your money can buy this car," he said, pausing for a beat, letting the first half of the statement hang in the air, a simple acknowledgement of an obvious fact. The pause was everything, a moment of silence that drew all focus to what would come next. Then came the final, devastating blow. "It can't buy you a right to break the law." The line, delivered without anger or malice, but as a simple declaration of principle, landed with the force of a physical impact. Marcus Thorne, a man who had built an empire on the belief that money could buy anything and everything, actually took an involuntary half-step backward, as if he had been physically struck. His mouth fell open, his jaw slack. For the first time in the entire encounter, he was rendered utterly and completely speechless. Without breaking his gaze, and with the same methodical calm, Davis opened the wallet, located the driver's license, and cleanly slid it out. He then extended his hand, offering the wallet back to its owner. Thorne, looking dazed, took it back numbly, his fingers fumbling with the expensive leather. Davis turned without another word, walked a few steps back to his patrol car, leaned against the hood, and with the beam of his flashlight illuminating his ticket book, he began to write. The simple, bureaucratic act felt like a final, definitive victory. The methodical scratching of Davis's pen on the paper was the only sound for a long moment. Each stroke was firm, precise, and unwavering. He was not just writing citations for driving under the influence, reckless driving, and disorderly conduct. He felt as though he were authoring the first chapter of Marcus Thorne's long overdue education in humility. He was documenting a truth that his body camera had already recorded, a truth that would soon be undeniable to everyone. Thorne had bought himself a car, but he had just earned himself a reckoning. Having finally found his voice again, Thorne launched into one last, desperate volley of threats, his words now sounding hollow and impotent. "You're finished," he shrieked, his voice cracking with rage. "You'll be off the force by sunrise. I will personally see to it that you never wear that uniform again. I will destroy you. You are a dead man walking, Davis." The threats were loud and theatrical, but they lacked the conviction they had earlier. They were the desperate roars of a defeated king. Davis finished writing, tore the citation copies from the pad with a sharp, satisfying rip, and walked back to Thorne. He ignored the shouted threats as if they were nothing more than the buzzing of a fly. He handed the papers to Thorne. "Your court date and arraignment information are on the citation," he said, his voice flat and official. "You are free to call for a ride, but you will not be driving this vehicle tonight, sir. Per department policy for DUI arrests, we are impounding it." The finality in his tone was absolute. The impoundment of the Bentley was the ultimate loss of control for Thorne. He was left standing on the side of a dark road, holding a piece of paper, a multi-millionaire suddenly stranded and powerless. He snatched the ticket from Davis's hand, his face a grotesque mask of impotent fury. He was surrounded by the symbols of his wealth, yet he had never been more diminished. He had lost, and he knew it. Officer Davis turned and walked away, the encounter officially over. As he passed Officer Miller, he gave a brief, almost imperceptible nod. Miller stared back, his face a portrait of awe and profound respect for the man he now considered his mentor. Reaching his own chest, Davis pressed the button on his body camera. The small, steady red light that had served as the night's silent, unblinking witness finally blinked off. The indisputable truth of the last 30 minutes was now safely preserved, a digital bombshell waiting to explode. The journey of the body cam footage from a police evidence locker to the public domain was swift and untraceable. An anonymous source, likely a civilian clerk in the department deeply moved by what they saw, leaked the digital file to a prominent local news blogger. The blogger, who had built a career on exposing the abuses of the city's rich and powerful, knew he had dynamite. He uploaded the video late that night with a simple incendiary title, "A Miami Millionaire's Meltdown." Watch Marcus Thorne abuse the officer who pulled him over. He hit the publish button, and the small, contained explosion of that night on the side of the road was sent hurtling out into the world. By the next morning, the video was no longer just a local story. It was a national obsession. It spread across social media platforms like a digital wildfire, racking up millions of views per hour. Hashtags began to trend globally. Hashtag Officer Davis became a symbol of integrity. Hashtag Bentley Bully became the moniker for Thorne. And the phrase, hashtag Dignity Ice Not for Sale, was plastered across countless posts. The raw, unedited footage was undeniable. News networks preempted their regular programming to show clips, with analysts and legal experts dissecting every second of the encounter, every word of the exchange. The court of public opinion was in session, and its verdict was swift, unanimous, and brutal for Marcus Thorne. A powerful montage of public reaction began to form across the nation. In a bustling New York coffee shop, patrons huddled around a single tablet, their faces a mixture of disgust and admiration. On a quiet bus in Chicago, a woman watched on her phone, shaking her head slowly, before looking up with a newfound respect at a transit officer standing nearby. In a living room in California, a family watched on their large screen TV, the father turning to his son and saying, "That, right there, is what character looks like." The public had not just seen a video. They had connected with a hero, a quiet, everyday man who had stood his ground against the loud, ugly face of unchecked privilege. The story's momentum attracted the attention of a tenacious investigative reporter for the Miami Herald. While others focused on the drama of the confrontation, she was intrigued by a single glaring loose end, Thorne's frantic claim of a family emergency at the hospital. It felt false, and her reporter's instinct told her to pull on that thread. Making a series of discreet calls to her network of sources, she quickly confirmed her suspicions. An anonymous tip from a disgruntled casino employee placed Thorne not at a hospital, but at a notorious high-stakes underground poker game in a mansion on Palm Island, a detail that painted his lies in an even more despicable light. The reporter's expose was published the following day, and it landed like a bombshell. The story, complete with damning quotes from sources who saw Thorne drinking heavily and losing a substantial amount of money, stripped away any last shred of sympathy he might have had. He was not just a bully and a drunk driver. He was a pathetic liar who had cynically used the specter of a family tragedy as a get-out-of-jail-free card. The corporate fallout was immediate and catastrophic. The board of directors for Thorne's real estate empire called an emergency meeting. Major investors began to pull out, and a national charity publicly severed all ties with him, denouncing his behavior. His meticulously crafted public image had been irrevocably shattered. The courtroom was a cold, sterile environment, its polished wood and fluorescent lighting offering no comfort. Stripped of his custom-tailored suits and the protective armor of his Bentley, Marcus Thorne stood before the judge's bench, looking startlingly small and ordinary. His face was pale, his usual arrogant confidence replaced by a tense, nervous apprehension. His expensive lawyer whispered instructions in his ear, but Thorne seemed barely to hear him. He was no longer a mogul or a titan of industry. In this room, under the unwavering gaze of the law, he was merely a defendant, his fate resting in the hands of others. He had lost control, and the terror of it was written all over his face. On the other side of the room, sitting at the prosecution's table, was Officer Frank Davis. He wore his formal dress uniform, the dark navy fabric perfectly pressed, his medals and badges gleaming under the harsh overhead lights. He sat with his back ramrod straight, his hands resting calmly on his knees, a portrait of stoic professionalism. His face was an unreadable mask, betraying none of the turmoil or satisfaction he might be feeling. He was not here as a victim seeking revenge, but as a witness for the state, a representative of the law that Thorne had so brazenly tried to trample. His very presence was a quiet, powerful testament to the evening's events. The bailiffs sharp, all rise, announced the arrival of Judge Eleanor Vance. She was a woman in her late 60s, with sharp, intelligent eyes that peered over the top of her reading glasses. She carried with her a formidable reputation for legal brilliance and an absolute intolerance for the theatrics and manipulations of high-priced lawyers. She settled into her large leather chair, her gaze sweeping across the courtroom, lingering for a moment on Thorne's anxious face before settling on Officer Davis with an expression of unreadable gravity. A hush fell over the room as she picked up her gavel. The climax of the saga was about to begin. Thorne's lawyer immediately rose to his feet, launching into a pre-rehearsed motion to have the case dismissed. He argued passionately that the illegal leaking of the bodycam footage had irrevocably tainted the jury pool and created a media circus that made a fair trial impossible. He called it a public lynching and decried the trial by social media his client had endured. Judge Vance listened to his entire speech without interruption, her fingers steepled before her. When he was finished, she didn't hesitate. She struck her gavel once, the sharp crack echoing through the silent room. "The court is not concerned with public opinion, counselor," she said, her voice sharp as glass. "It is concerned only with the facts of the case." Motion denied. The prosecutor, a young, determined woman, then stood. "Your Honor, the people would like to present Exhibit A, the complete unedited body camera footage from the night of the arrest, recorded by Officer Frank Davis." At a nod from the judge, a large projection screen was lowered from a recess in the ceiling. The lights in the courtroom dimmed slightly. A wave of anticipation rippled through the gallery. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for, to see the raw evidence, not in short clips on their phones, but in its full, damning context within the sanctum of the law. The video began to play. The entire 30-minute encounter filled the large screen, the audio system making every condescending word from Thorne, every calm response from Davis, crystal clear. The courtroom watched in a stunned, uncomfortable silence as the ugly drama unfolded. The insults, the threats, the lie about the hospital, and the final, degrading act of throwing the wallet on the ground were even more shocking when viewed in this formal setting. Thorne refused to look at the screen. He kept his head bowed, staring intently at his own hands as if they were the most interesting things in the world, his face a pale, sweating mask of humiliation. Officer Davis, however, watched the screen impassively. He was reliving the most stressful 30 minutes of his recent life, yet his expression remained neutral. He was not seeing his own humiliation. He was seeing the clear, methodical execution of his training under extreme duress. He was seeing his own patience, his de-escalation tactics, his adherence to procedure. In the harsh, objective light of the courtroom, he felt a quiet, profound sense of validation. He had done his job correctly. The truth was being seen by all, and that truth was absolute, unassailable, and on his side. The video concluded with the image of Davis pressing the button to end the recording, the steady red light blinking out. The screen went black, and a thick, heavy silence descended upon the courtroom. It was a silence filled with the weight of what everyone had just witnessed. Judge Vance slowly removed her reading glasses and began to polish the lenses with a small silk cloth, a deliberate, thoughtful gesture that seemed to stretch on for an eternity. Finally, she put them back on and fixed her gaze directly on Marcus Thorne. Her expression was one of deep, undisguised contempt. She began to speak, her voice low, but infused with an authority that commanded the absolute attention of every person in the room. "Mr. Thorne," she began, "in my 25 years on this bench, I have seen many examples of poor judgment. I have seen arrogance, and I have seen entitlement, but rarely have I witnessed such a repugnant and deliberate display of contempt for the law and for the men and women who risk their lives to uphold it." She delivered a searing indictment of his actions, not just as a series of criminal violations, but as a moral failing, an assault on the very fabric of a civil society built on mutual respect. Then, in a move that stunned the entire courtroom, she swiveled her large leather chair slightly, turning her body to face Officer Davis directly. The prosecutors, the defense attorney, the gallery, everyone followed her gaze. It was a highly unusual, almost unprecedented gesture. "Officer Davis," she said, her voice clear and firm, "would you please rise?" Confused but obedient, Davis stood, his tall frame coming to perfect attention, his hands clasped behind his back. He stood alone, the focus of every eye in the room. The judge's voice, which had been so sharp and cold when addressing Thorne, now softened, though it lost none of its inherent power. "Mr. Thorne seems to operate under the delusion that his wealth grants him a different set of rules," she continued, now addressing the entire court, but looking only at Davis. "In this courtroom, that delusion ends. Here, the only status that matters is one's status before the law. And on behalf of the entire judicial system, that Mr. Thorne attempted to corrupt, and on behalf of the city that he so profoundly dishonored with his actions that night, I wish to offer you, Officer Davis, our deepest respect and a formal public apology for the disgraceful abuse you were forced to endure while honorably serving the citizens of this community. A profound, stunned silence hung in the courtroom for a long moment following the judge's apology. Then, from the public gallery, a single person began to clap. It was a soft, hesitant sound, but it was quickly joined by another, and then another, until a wave of warm, respectful applause filled the chamber. It wasn't loud or boisterous, but a heartfelt expression of solidarity and gratitude. Reporters, sensing the historic nature of the moment, rushed from the room, their fingers already flying across their phone screens to file the story. Still standing, Officer Davis gave a single, dignified nod to Judge Vance. It was a brief, silent exchange between two public servants, a shared acknowledgement of a principle upheld and a wrong righted. Judge Vance then turned her severe gaze back to Marcus Thorne, her voice reverting to its cold, official tone. She sentenced him to the maximum penalties allowed for his various misdemeanor charges, a significant 5-figure fine, a mandatory 1-year suspension of his driver's license, and enrollment in a state-certified alcohol and anger management program. But the final part of the sentence was what truly landed with force. Furthermore, the judge declared, you are ordered to complete 500 hours of community service. And to ensure you have ample time to reflect on the nature of public service, those hours will be spent cleaning public transit facilities and city parks. Thorne swayed slightly, his face ashen. The public humiliation was now complete and legally mandated. As the bailiff led a hollow-eyed Marcus Thorne from the courtroom, Davis was immediately surrounded by a sea of blue uniforms. His fellow officers, who had packed the back of the room in a show of support, surged forward to congratulate him. His chief, a man not known for open displays of emotion, clapped him firmly on the shoulder, his voice thick with pride. You made every single one of us proud today, Frank, he said. Officer Miller, his young partner from that night, was there too, his eyes shining with unvarnished admiration as he shook Davis's hand. I'll never forget what I learned from you that night, sir, he said earnestly. Never. Stepping out of the courthouse into the bright Miami sun, Davis was met by a chaotic swarm of news crews and reporters shouting his name. Reluctant by nature to be in the spotlight, he knew he had a responsibility to speak. He stepped up to the microphones and gave a brief, humble statement, thanking the judge, the prosecutor, and the public for their overwhelming support. In a final, poignant moment, he dedicated his actions not to himself, but to the memory of his late father, who had also worn the Miami PD uniform. My father taught me, Davis said, his voice steady, that a badge is heavy because it's not a symbol of power, but a symbol of public trust. I just tried to honor that trust. Later that afternoon, as the news cycle continued to replay his statement, Davis's personal cell phone rang. The caller ID showed it was the administrative office of the Miami Police Academy. It was the academy's commander. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. He formally offered Davis a new, prestigious position, lead instructor for the department's de-escalation and professional conduct training program. We don't just want you to teach the curriculum, Frank, the commander said, his voice resonating with respect. We want you to be the living example of it for every new recruit that comes through our doors. It was the ultimate form of professional vindication. The scene shifted to a brightly lit classroom at the police academy. A month had passed. Instructor Davis stood before a rapt audience of fresh-faced cadets, their expressions a mixture of eagerness and nervousness. On the large screen behind him was a paused image from his own bodycam footage. He used the video not as a trophy of his victory, but as a complex and challenging case study. He walked the recruits through every moment, detailing his thought process, the importance of emotional containment, and the core, unshakable principle of treating every single person with dignity, not because the law required it, but because their shared humanity demanded it. Weeks later, a quiet, peaceful evening found Davis at his kitchen table, helping his 13-year-old daughter, Emily, with her civics homework. She looked up from her textbook, her expression serious. My teacher played that video in class today, Dad, she said. "The one from the news." Davis's heart tensed for a moment. "Oh," he asked quietly. "Yeah," she continued, a proud smile breaking across her face. "After it was over, everyone said you were a hero." Davis felt a wave of relief and love wash over him. He reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "I was just doing my job, sweetheart," he said, knowing that because of his new position and raise, her college fund was finally secure. The incident became known in journalistic and academic circles as the Davis effect. The viral video and the judge's powerful statement had sparked a renewed citywide conversation about civility, public service, and the corrosive nature of entitlement. Seizing the opportunity for positive change, the Miami Police Department, with Davis as its public face, launched a new community outreach initiative called Badge of Trust. The program aimed to rebuild relationships and foster mutual respect between officers and the diverse neighborhoods they served, turning a single ugly incident into a catalyst for widespread healing and understanding. Months later, a local news channel ran a follow-up story. It included a brief, grainy shot of Marcus Thorne, almost unrecognizable. He was clad in a bright orange community service vest, silently picking up discarded trash along a busy highway median as luxury cars, perhaps even a few Bentleys, roared past him. He kept his head down, his face shielded by a baseball cap, a man of immense wealth, made anonymous by his public disgrace. He was just another person paying his debt to society, a living testament to the fact that his money had bought him a world of trouble, but it couldn't buy him an exemption from consequence. The story concluded with a final, hopeful image. Frank Davis, off-duty and in civilian clothes, stood on the sidelines of a community soccer field, watching Emily's team play. The setting sun cast a warm, golden glow over the scene. The deep, weary lines that had once been etched around his eyes were gone, replaced by a look of profound peace and contentment. He was not a mogul, a celebrity, or a man defined by wealth. He was a father, a teacher, and a public servant who, on one dark night, had quietly stood his ground and, in doing so, had reminded an entire city that the true measure of a person's worth is their integrity, a form of power that no amount of money can ever hope to purchase. Officer Davis showed incredible integrity under pressure. What would you have done in his situation? Share your thoughts in the comments, and let's celebrate the everyday heroes who uphold their duty with dignity. Leave a little heart if you believe love is more powerful than any wealth. Subscribe for more second chance stories. Comment love is priceless if you also believe in human kindness.